Hello again, everyone, and thanks for being here. We have another great session for you. And continuing with our theme today of really looking at the world of climate change through some very different lenses that hopefully complete our view or help complete our view of the world. We have a great session featuring Charles Duncan and Sarah Snyder. I'll introduce them both in just a second. We do have some people who are joining us for the first time today, so please indulge me as I offer them some suggestions on how they can interact with us. All of you already know that you can enter your questions and comments in at any time using the buttons, the chat area on the left side of the screen, and as Jared just spoke to us about as well, you can also use Twitter or your cell phones to engage with us. If you're using your cell phone, send your messages to 99503 and just make the word chat the first word in your message. All right? So we look forward to engaging with you. Charles and Sarah have a very interactive discussion plan. They really want to hear from you, and they're going to help us look at the world, as I mentioned, in a different way and ask some really good questions of all of us. So sit back, enjoy, and allow me to introduce to you first Charles Duncan, collection specialist at the Archives of American Art. He is based in New York, and he'll in turn also welcome Sarah Snyder, who is the webmaster at the Archives of American Art here in DC. Over to you, Charles.
Okay. Well, it's great to be here today. Thank you, Jonathan. It's really great to participate in this important and timely virtual conference on the topic of climate change. I must say I've certainly learned a lot on the subject from the experts here at the Smithsonian over the last couple of days. As Jonathan said, I'm Charles Duncan. I'm a collection specialist, part of the curatorial team at the Archives of American Art, and I work in our New York Research Center. And I'm here today with my colleague. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sarah Snyder. I'm the webmaster for the Archives of America, DC.
Great. Well, what we hope to do in our session is something a little bit different. And as Jonathan said, I'd like to encourage interactivity as much as possible, do a little bit less talking, and have you put in some responses and ideas as they come up, not just necessarily questions and answers, but obviously observations, because we're kind of dealing with the visual world here. But what we hope to do in this session, which is a slightly different vantage to the idea of climate change, is number one, we'll tell you a little bit about the historical relationship between artists in the natural world. Then we'll kind of follow it up by tracing the interesting history of video as a medium. And finally, we're going to try to bring the two of these together by looking how one artist, Paul Ryan, has used this medium of video as a tool to share information about the environment and kind of posit some nice alternatives for approaching this issues of sustainability. So I know that people are coming in from various parts of the world, scientists, teachers, students. They might not know exactly that much about the Archives of American Art. So first, I just want to tell you a little bit about what we do and what our role here is at the Smithsonian. Well, first of all, we are the world's largest and most widely used resource on the history of art in America. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means if you're doing a biography on an artist, or perhaps gathering information on a particular work of art that you've seen maybe at a museum, or maybe you even own this work of art, or perhaps you're doing an academic or scholarly paper on a topic with the visual arts, you might come to the Archives of American Art to use collections. Well, what exactly are these collections? I think the simplest way to think about it is in two broad categories. One is what we call oral history interviews. And you'll see a picture here on the right top. You'll see an artist, Beatrice Wood, being interviewed. And what happens here is that it's a one-on-one interview with an artist. Their thoughts and ideas and histories are recorded and transcribed so that people can come back to these oral histories at a later time and learn about the thoughts and ideas and histories of artists directly from their own voices. Certainly the other major area that the Archives of American Art has in its research collections are what we call papers. And here you see my colleague Liza Kerwin. She's visiting an artist named Sheila Hicks at her studio in Paris. And Liza here is talking with Sheila about donating her papers to the Archives of American Art. Well, what exactly are papers, you might ask? Well, unlike a library, an archive tries to really give emphasis to one-of-a-kind, unique primary source materials. On the left here, you see a letter from the famous artist Thomas Cole, whose work we'll see in a little bit. A letter to fellow artist Asher B. Durand from 1847. This is a great example of a primary source research tool. letters, diaries, journals, things like this, even passports that we have at the Archives of American Art are really great resources for doing primary source research on an artistic subject. Certainly, we also have printed materials. On the left, on the right, you see a rare exhibition catalog from a modernist exhibition held in New York in 1926, and these are some of the gems that we have in our collections as well. Well, certainly a large component of our collections, what we call papers, are photographs, and since we want to get your interactive juices flowing at a very early point, I'm going to ask you a question here. Can any of you out there identify this well-known artist in this photograph? I'm not going to give you a lot of clues other than to say that he's an American artist and that he was famous during the second half of the 20th century. So why don't you take a look at that, that image for a while. I also mentioned that our photographic collections, we have pictures of people, of artists, their family, their friends. We have certainly photographs of artworks, exhibitions, and other events. So take another minute or two, and what we're going to do today is do a lot of looking at images. So I want to see if you can come up with a correct answer. And my colleague Sarah is going to be watching the incoming responses here, and maybe we'll have a little contest to see who can kind of come up with this first.
Well, actually, the answers have been flowing in, and it seems to be unanimous. People have identified this person as Andy Warhol.
Okay, you got it. Good. All right.
Knowledgeable.
Very, very fast response. I'm very, very impressed. I shouldn't be surprised after all the knowledgeable responses to the other sessions for the last couple of days here. So
we did have somebody throw in that it is Andy Warhol, young at that.
It certainly is. He was at his college, and we'll come back to this image in a little bit, and I'll tell you a little bit more about its history. Well, what do we do with the archives? Well, one of the main things we have to do here when we have all these collections of papers, we have over 16 million documents, is we spend a large part of our staff resources and time what we call processing collections, which is sort of putting an intellectual backbone to some of these collections. Here on the left, you see an archivist, Jana Hansen, who's working actually with a physical collection of papers there, putting it into order and writing what we call a finding aid. Well, certainly this idea of papers is not only papers in a traditional sense. As you see on the right here, a lot of our, speaking of non-traditional paper things here,
none of us have any idea where that's coming from.
Our fax machine, so.
Remember, only text, chat, and Twitter. No faxes, please.
Okay. Let's talk about an interactive presentation here, certainly. Well, that's a perfect segue to saying that those things which are on our collections are not all paper. A lot of the assets that come in collections these days come on DVDs, audio cassettes, VHS tapes. Here our audio-visual archivist, Megan McShay, stands next to a relatively new contraption that we have that allows us to convert various types of new media and preserve them and present. And well, certainly with this idea of electronic media, if people are coming into this conference from all over the world, certainly you can come in, you can use physical papers in our research spaces if you're a researcher. But of course, we are now heading out to the web as a way to present our collections to people. I'm going to have Sarah talk a little bit about it.
Right, well, I want to briefly introduce you to the resources that are available on the Archives of American Art's website, which is at aaa.si.edu. As Charles explained, the Archives has over 16 million primary source documents in our going back as far as the 18th century up to the present day. Thanks to a massive digitization project, which is ongoing, you can currently access over 750,000 images and more than 700 interviews online for free. So prior to this project, you would have had to actually visit in person in order to get access to a lot of this material. So just encourage those of you out there to go to our website and explore our online exhibitions. You see in this slide one of the ways that you can actually look at our primary source collections using the web. And I think that teachers and students especially would appreciate how valuable it is to have this kind of historical information freely available.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I shall say that if you are in Washington, D.C. or in New York City, we do have 2 exhibition spaces where we do specialized shows on some of our archival holdings. And we also publish a journal. And if you go to the virtual exhibit hall, we do have a copy of our journal, a recent copy that features ideas about artists working with landscape, which is a little bit pertinent to the idea of climate change here today, or at least to artists working with nature. So we encourage you to go there and download that as a PDF. Well, certainly the reason we're here today, here's, of course, the answer to our question, the Andy Warhol photograph, and I show Andy both young and old here. You guys, I'm very impressed that you came up with the answer so quickly, and I must say that this nice photograph just recently came in with a collection from the painter Philip Pearlstein within his papers, and just as a little side bit, a little tidbit for those who are familiar with Philip Pearlstein, he and Andy Warhol were college roommates, and Philip took this picture of him in college at the Carnegie Institute of Technology while Andy was enjoying a popsicle on the front yard there. So there we have it. It's a little bits of history that can be both some of them very pithy, but some of them just fun, definitely interesting to look at.
We did have someone in our group today who identified it as Warhol at Carnegie Tech. Congrats, Abby. Good job.
They're pretty good. I'm very impressed.
I
Yeah,
know.
good.
Keep you on your
Good. Well, the reason we're here today, of course, is to talk about climate change. And I'm certainly not a climate scientist, nor do I play one on TV, but I think we should go and review some of the main things that some of our other colleagues here who have devoted a lot of their research time have kind of presented in the last couple sessions here. Just very briefly, some of the main points I think that we need to just remember are that greenhouse gases are rising primarily as a result of human activity. And as Bert Drake talked about yesterday, certainly carbon dioxide is the main culprit here, and this is mostly due to the burning of fossil fuel. Surface temperature is rising. The average temperature in the U.S. has risen more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit over the last 50 years. The Arctic Sea ice is rapidly declining and sea level is rising. Certainly, the Archives of American Art is based in Washington, D.C. and New York City, and we've seen some kind of compelling images of what those two cities could look like once these sea levels rise. It's rather sobering, I must say. Climate change affects different areas of the U.S. and world in different ways. In one sense, what we're thinking we're doing locally might be okay. I think we have to think about the bigger picture of everything and trying to think about that idea as we go along today. And finally, unless we take action, these effects will not be reversed. Certainly, one of the most important things that people have underscored in the last couple of days is that we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So with that said, we're going to look at some way artists have dealt with the natural world. And, well, I'm going to start with a very, very, very early image here. Certainly, I would like to posit the idea that really when we trace man's intellectual history, some of the earliest records, really the earliest traces of man's intellectual history are visual, and they relate to the natural world. Now, these are Neolithic, Paleolithic cave paintings from Lascaux, the caves in southern France. These appear on the walls of the cave, deep within the caves here. And I'm not giving you a lot of information about these, but if we were to look at these, we can certainly identify these animals as bison. It's been generally how do we come up with this? Doug Herman in his last session used this word epistemology. Well, certainly we don't have any textual evidence at this point to tell us what these images are about, but by making a little bit of comparison to what we see on the wall, what's represented in this picture, even though they're rather abstract, we go out to the real world and we compare them to something, the bison living in the real world. In a very simple way, we've identified what the subjects are here. This is quite interesting considering that these images, which are about 16,000 years old, predate written history by at least 10,000 years. Certainly the culture that produced this, which we do not know that much about, did not have a written language, but certainly could convey some ideas visually. And it's interesting that are fascinating, to go back and learn about these cultures, not only through archaeological evidence, but actually through visual traces that artists and the way they've interpreted the world here. Without a written language, certainly they would have communicated ideas to each other orally, through an oral tradition. We think of our oral histories as a way of pulling things out of memory. When you consider that these images were created very, very deep inside of caves, you have to think about how these artists would have rendered these images of bison on the wall. Would they have brought sketches down with them? Would they have done preparatory sketches up above? certainly wouldn't have brought the bison down there to compare to the images, but you must think that in a culture that is an oral culture that has a privilege of memory, certainly visual memory would have been very strong at this time for these artists. We move ahead to just about 500 years ago. Here we do have a little text to tell us what this is about. It says rhinoceros, 1515 on the top. I want to throw out a question right here to everyone. I want to ask you, it's sort of a yes or no question here, is this a faithful representation of a rhinoceros?
And let's go ahead and do this as a poll question first. I'll bring up, created a little room here to the side of our rhino, and maybe you could go ahead and vote yes or no for us and tell us what you think. Is this a faithful representation of a rhinoceros? I'll show you those results as they come in too, so you can see how your vote compares to others.
Kind of interesting. I'm watching the coming in here. We're sort of on the fence, about half and half almost as we go here. Well, certainly it's a pretty credible, highly detailed image. And it's a little bit of a loaded question because there are many different types of rhinoceroses. But
in fact, Gary says it looks like a Javan rhino.
There you have. Well, it's. I'll tell you the story behind this, and it's kind of an interesting idea. If we go back to the idea of looking at something and how we kind of interpret the natural world. This image is a drawing by the Renaissance artist, German Renaissance artist Albrecht Dürer. You might think of him as a contemporary of Leonardo da Vinci, and in one sense he is certainly a quintessential Renaissance man, and that was not only interested in the arts, but in sciences and the natural world here. It may surprise you to know that Albrecht Dürer never even saw this rhinoceros before he made this image. And the story behind it, which the German at the bottom of the drawing tells you, is that obviously rhinoceros is not indigenous to Europe or to Germany, where Dürer lived in the early 16th century. But the story tells us that a rhinoceros, which was an Indian rhinoceros, was brought to Lisbon, Portugal, by the king there to sort of put into a zoo and ultimately as a gift for Pope Leo X. And stories of the rhinoceros, which were gained obviously a lot of attention at the time, got back to Dürer both in a written form, but in just in very, very loose sketches. So using this idea, this kind of information he had coming to him about the rhinoceros, he put this image together here. He did a pretty good job of getting something that looks a lot like a rhinoceros, certainly as we look at it today. And for us to answer the question, we'd have to actually either look at an actual rhinoceros, or maybe we have the luxury of having pretty good photographs in this day and age to compare it to. But certainly if you were a German at that point, you would have no idea whether this was faithful or not. Certainly, I'm not an animal person in any sense, but there's certainly a little horn here on the top that tells us this is a little embellishment that Dürer put on there. We can also see that these plates, and I guess the Indian rhinoceros actually does have some types of almost plates on them, but it almost looks like it has rivets on here, and perhaps Dürer is thinking a little bit more about the emergence of plate armor during the Renaissance than he's actually thinking about the animal here. Well, it's kind of interesting that, with Dürer's interpretation of this rhinoceros, if you think about the time that he's working, is right in 1515 would be right about the time that the printing press comes into play. You think about Gutenberg and the Gutenberg Bible, and why this is important. We were talking about an oral culture that passed information on by word of mouth to each other. Well, certainly when Gutenberg's printing presses came out, it allowed certainly it ushered in really the modern era of literacy, because text could be disseminated to people, and people could learn to read and gain their information that way. Reading is alphabetic, but it's also visual to a certain extent. And you see in this case, in the example I'm showing here, Dürer made a wood print after his drawing, and it became very, very popular. And this went out, and this was certainly the idea in Europe of a rhinoceros for over 300 years, until actual rhinoceroses were brought into Europe to compare to. So that idea of how we know about the visual world, about the natural world, I think we need to ask some questions from the images we see, take a hard look at things, and kind of think about the differences or how these images of the natural world relate to the actual. It comes here to the United States, or the early America after the settlement of Europe. Europeans coming to America. Certainly one of our most famous artists of the natural world is James Audubon. And I'm going to ask a question right away with this one. And it says, what is the species of bird that Audubon has recorded here, and how might it relate to a conference about sustainability? Now, it's a slightly loaded question, and let's see if we can, what kind of answers we're going to get on this. There is a specific right and wrong answer to this, but some...
But don't let that prevent you from attempting an answer.
Exactly. What kind of responses are we getting?
We're getting, I don't want to start saying them, I don't want to influence anybody until I've seen a few. Oh, here they come.
There we go. I think we've got one. Someone from the Kellen Archives has said passenger pigeon, and that is certainly the case here. Now, if you're very clever, you had a very, very big screen, you would see that there's a script that says passenger pigeon down here. That's a little bit of an exercise for how closely we look at things. But certainly the passenger pigeon relates to our conversation today when we think that this bird was extinct by 1914. And Audubon, of course, was a little bit savvy to this. He was a great naturalist, and he went around documenting birds, and in 1826 published a very, very popular portfolio of birds of America with 435 plates of actual life-size images of birds. Unlike Dürer, Audubon definitely made his images directly after nature. He had access to the actual animals, although his means were not necessarily the best, because generally he would go out and shoot the birds and stuff them and bring them into his studio so he could use them as models. But certainly it's a cautionary tale with sustainability, considering that the passenger pigeon was the most populous bird in all of America in the beginning of the 19th century. It was estimated 3 to 5 billion passenger pigeons. And then definitely by the pressures of man through hunting and just loss of habitat, passenger pigeon is now extinct. We do have this wonderful, interesting visual record here made by Audubon. We go away from sort of the animals into the idea of the landscape. I showed you a little earlier a letter from the artist Thomas Cole, and this is one of his more famous paintings called The Oxbow from 1836, so just a little bit after the time of Audubon. And certainly for this idea of the early European settlers in what was then America, the idea of land is very, very important. We think about the westward expansion and the idea of land that sort of underlies a lot of the American thinking. And Thomas Cole here is showing the Oxbow. He's showing a relatively realistic-looking scene here. The Oxbow is an actual feature on the Connecticut River. This is just a little bit south of Northampton, Massachusetts, and it's looking down from Mount Holyoke. And today, if you were to drive up Route 191 to Northampton, Mass., you would go right by and see this Oxbow, which looks similar in a lot of ways. Well, unlike Audubon, who's trying to just be really naturalistic in his copying of the world that he sees, Cole is a great artist at looking at landscapes, but I think he's also kind of saying a lot of things. He's interpreting and giving us a lot of ideas about the place of man and what's happening with the natural landscape at this period. Now, to have a little fun with art history and ask, well, how do we kind of read these images? What do we do? We'll take a little bit of liberties, although I think that Thomas Cole would go along with us. Let's first of all just say that maybe we can kind of look at this diagonal here, and let me get. Do I have a pointer here? Yep, just click here, and we kind of have a diagonal that divides our painting here, and we have this side here, which is a little bit more dark. And this side here, which is a little bit more light, that leads out into the western horizon there. I think what Cole is trying to present in a certain way is a juxtaposition between sort of the untamed natural world and a little bit of the world that is now being settled by the European American settlers at this point. It's a little hard to see. I know you're looking at this in computer screens. Perhaps some of you have it projected. But what we do see here is some of the fields and so on down here, which are tended and have been modified by man, versus this really kind of raw state of up here on Mount Holyoke. We see this, the sky is ominous and untamed and turbulent, versus this much more calm, light sky here out to the right of the picture. We could even maybe say that he's has all the elements in here. We have earth and fire. It's very, very, very hard to see, but there's little smoke, wisps of smoke coming up from human settlements here. Here we have a tree that has probably been hit by lightning, so we kind of have a juxtaposition of fire between the natural world and the settled world here. If you look very, very closely, we even see the presence of man here. It's very, very difficult to see if you have a small screen, but right here we see a little self-portrait of the artist. We have a little image of Thomas Cole in there, sitting on top of the hill as he looks down at the scene, painting his scene, looking out at the western horizon there. So we have a very literal reference to the presence of man in this, and it also gives us a little sense of the scale, how small he is within this natural world. So what looks like a simple sort of really kind of realistic rendering of the landscape, I think Cole has really imbued it with a lot of extra meanings about man's relationship to the natural world. So if we jump ahead about 100 years, we look at another painting. This is by an American, Charles Sheeler, and it's not by coincidence that he's titled this painting American Landscape. What we see here is quite a very different world. We're looking at really almost what we say the triumph of man over nature in this painting. Now Charles Sheeler was known as a precisionist, part of the precisionist movement. Was very interested in machines and man-made world. He was a photographer, and he was actually hired by the Ford Motor Company to come out and document through photography, through very beautiful art photography, some of their plants in their factories out in Michigan. And he would use some of this photography as a basis for his paintings. Now, if we compare this to Cole, we do have some of the same elements here. We have, let me get my pointer back. We do have water, but instead of the natural Connecticut River, here we have a man-made canal. We do have the idea of fire, but ultimately here is a smokestack which is spewing out, think of Bert Drake's talk on greenhouse gases. This is a good example where we see the smoke. Really, it's hard to tell the difference between the smoke coming out of the stack and the clouds in the sky. We also, if we take a really hard look, look down and see that there's a little man here. And here, instead of sitting out in nature, he is between several railroad cars on the tracks here. So he's definitely dwarfed, instead of by nature, but definitely dwarfed by the man-made world. This all begs an interesting question. What is Sheeler's take on this? Is he making an environmental statement, or is it a celebration of what we would call progress at that point? So in 1930, I'm sure the views would be very different than they are today. I'm not going to give an answer on that, but it's just something to think about when we look at these types of images. I only wanted to end up with one last painting, being a little bit painting-centric here, but one last painting by the photorealist painter Richard Estes. And this is a scene in Antarctica. And I'm going to ask a question right away, and I'm kind of interested in your responses on this. Do you think this image about Antarctica relates to climate change, and why?
Yeah, for the first part of that question, go ahead and let us know if you think it relates or doesn't, yes or no. I put that poll up for you. And go ahead and tell us why you answered the way you did in the chat box below.
Good. So we'll think about this. I just want to kind of throw out the idea that, and I'm not going to give you an answer to this. It's just something for you to think about. When we see an image of the natural world, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, it's interesting to see our responses coming in here. It's heavily weighted towards yes. And my guess would be that there's, when we see images of Antarctica now, it reminds us of the changes taking place. Can we talk about Antarctica without thinking about climate change? Well, let me throw out the idea that I've met Richard Estes. I don't think that he's particularly interested in those issues. I think he likes to look at nature. I'm not going to diss him, as you would say, and said he's not interested in these things. But for him, the exercise really is about painting, although we do see some of the same conventions here. But I think, again, my point is that we do bring a lot of baggage to images when we come and encounter them. We kind of project a lot of our own thinking upon images of the natural world. Well, I've shown you a lot of paintings.
I'll move this pole out of your way, everybody. There we
Okay.
go. Click one more time.
Okay, great. I've shown you a lot of paintings and types of imagery that you would find in an art museum or perhaps in an art gallery. It's not to say that all artists who are interested in nature produce just paintings and drawings and sculptures. Definitely a lot of them work directly with nature. And this is an interesting fellow here, Bob Schuler, who had quite an interesting idea. He's got these 450-pound granite blocks that he has carved. And you can see here up at his home, I took a photo of him quite recently. And these are sort of sculptures in a way. He puts little messages and ideas on them. But Bob was interested in the idea of permanence. He wanted to do sculpture that would last longer than the Great Wall of China. And he figured that the best place to do that would be to take these sculptures and drop them to the ocean floor. And so over the last 20 or so years, Bob has been dropping these in a ring around the ocean, around the world, every 100 miles, in a project that he calls the Tethys Project. So he's actually interacting with the natural world in a very direct way by putting these on the floor. And it makes a great sort of philosophical question here. And this is definitely an open-ended question that you can just have a little bit of fun with. If a series of sculptures is on the bottom of the ocean floor and no one can see it, is it still art? Well, I'm not even going to posit an answer on that one. It's not only is a philosophical problem, but it's the basic art problem on a daily basis. So
I have to say, we're getting a lot of answers here, including this one from Wendy, who says that other biota, other living organisms see it. But I ask, isn't he polluting?
Well, Bob, he has a little bit of paint on these. But generally, he's actually talked to quite a number of people, and the environmental impact is quite minimal. If anything, they're encased on the bottom of the sea, and he thinks that they're going to break down. So aside from the paint, they are just solid granite blocks, so stones there. Although I'll let Bob defend himself on this issue in the future. So.
And we can ask Nancy Knowlton about it in her study of coral reefs tomorrow.
Sure, good. Maybe one of these blocks has ended up on one of our reefs. That could be an issue, so we have to be careful. So, finally, some artists, of course, have worked very directly in with the idea of environmentalism in mind. This artist, Agnes Dinesh, did a wonderful project called Wheatfield: A Confrontation in 1982, where she took a couple of acres of abandoned land. This is down in Battery Park City, a little bit south of where the World Trade Centers were, and she used this land, which was valued at $4.3 billion, and got access to it for several months and planted wheat field there. She raised the wheat, and ultimately it was an environmental statement about sort of the priorities that we have for our use of land, the economic value of land versus sort of its ability to sustain us. It's quite a dense and interesting project, but there's a whole group of artists who now especially are very interested in environmental issues. There's a great website called greenmuseum.org that you can check out. It'll tell you a little bit more about Agnes Dinesh and some of the other artists who are very direct in their interactions as artists. All right, well, that's sort of part one, and I thank you for bearing with me as we look there. And I'm going to have Jonathan's going to help pull up a little bit of video, since that's part of what we're here to talk about today. And I must say I'm grateful to my friend Rich, who provided me with this video, and get this going. And believe it or not, this is a little clip of the cyclone at Coney Island that my friend Rich made this video just several months ago when he was basically his iPhone. And as we watch this clip, which is kind of fun, I want to get a little poll question go and ask how many of you have ever made a video. A little pause so we're.
We'll pause a little because we have a few people who are a little faint of heart there. Okay, and
a little bit noisy too. So I'm curious, in a very serious way, to our participants today, how many of them have ever made a video and posted it to YouTube? sort of see our tech savvy today coming in here as we think about this idea of video. Watching, we have about a third of them as it stands right now have actually gone ahead and done this and made a video and posted it to YouTube. I see one of the responses coming in from a woman, Wendy Williams, says that she does use some YouTube videos for academic postings in some of her classes. So even those people who are not necessarily making the YouTube videos are definitely accessing or are aware of them and definitely part of their culture, if not for entertainment at this point. Well, certainly this idea of video, I'm kind of impressed by how many people have interacted with video. It's a fascinating medium, and certainly it is not that old. Hit this again. If you were in our present day, you can see a little bit of the evolution of the video equipment. This little handheld device, which you can find now, like my friend used to make his Coney Island video, is a relatively accessible product. About 1965, you're seeing really the first portable video unit here. This is the Sony Portapak. And unlike the little handheld model, it weighed about 40 pounds. They're making it look very glamorous here, but you had to charge up your batteries with this little remote unit, which would have reel-to-reel tape in there and allowed you to get out in the world there. Let me ask you sort of a difficult question, something that requires a little bit of thinking, and ask you how, if you go to a movie, if you go see a film, how is video different than film? I'm going to look for some of the responses coming in here because it's kind of an important kind of conversation for thinking about video as a whole.
So, differences between video and a film or a movie. Curious to hear what you all think.
Right, and as those responses are coming in, hearing a lot about people who don't have access to YouTube in some of the responses. It's kind of interesting. But let's think a little bit about this difference between video and film as we go ahead here. I'll say that the medium of video is something which really became into consumer use as opposed to broadcasting use. I showed you the Portapak really only happened in the mid-1960s. And what I'm showing you here is a flyer from some papers at the Archives of American Art, the Howard Wise Gallery papers. And this is from 1969, and this is really probably the first exhibition in the United States that dealt with video as an art form. So it was really in its germinal stage in the 1960s, and some of the people who are now were participating, and I'll talk about today, were really some of the leading figures in thinking about this video as a medium. Now, things like painting and sculpture have been around, as I've shown you, painting for 16,000 years at least. It's very exciting when a new medium comes in that visual artists can work with. And this was a very important exhibition, TV as a creative medium, that allowed artists to think about how to use this visual medium as an art form, but in other ways as well. Well, one of the artists who, probably most famous video artist who participated in this exhibition was a man named Nam June Paik, and I'm showing you a work of his, this is a giant sort of assemblage of televisions that are all wired together here called Electronic Superhighway. And this is right here in the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So if you come to Washington, D.C., you can see this. You can stand in front of it. It's quite overwhelming. Now, I don't know what kind of responses we've got to our difference between video and film.
We have a wide range. We have a number of people who think it's a matter of quality, that a film or a movie is of a higher quality in terms of its sound and its video and its plots and its lead persons. We also have people who say that it's about access, that video has, that film is about wider access versus video. We also, we have a variety of responses here. Those are, I think, among the most frequently cited ones.
Oh, good. Well, certainly one of the ideas I'd like to throw out right now, just maybe you don't think about the actual medium, the physical medium itself, but video is an electronic medium, whereas film is something that light passes through, is exposed, but you don't necessarily need electricity to make film work. You could have a movie playing just even with a candle going through it. But definitely video is something which is electronic. And when we look at this Namjoon Pike here, it is really something which is all wired together. You'd have to plug this in to fire this up and make it work. This idea of being electronic and part of the electronic world is quite an interesting one. And I put up the name Marshall McLuhan here on top. We spoke a little bit earlier about oral traditions, the people in the cave paintings, and we looked at Albrecht Dürer coming ahead to the idea of printed communications. These are the way that we share information. Well, Marshall McLuhan was very savvy, writing in the 1960s and early 1970s. He said, well, really, we're entering a new era, communication, that would be an electronic era. And we're moving from oral culture to written culture to electronic culture. And certainly, considering that he was writing long before the internet was around, he was relatively prescient, considering that today we're sharing and interacting quite actively around the world electronically through this virtual conference. So really, Marshall McLuhan is a great thinker, and of course his catch term, the global village, really speaks to this electronic wiring of the world and working together on things. Certainly a great subtext for thinking of issues, as we'll see. Here's another kind of fancy word that comes out of thinking about video, this word cybernetics. We think about cyberspace, and we hear about cyborgs. Well, what does cybernetics mean exactly, and how might this kind of pertain to video? Well, cybernetics, the Greek, its Greek origins really means self-steering. A very interesting and sort of easy example is to say, well, a guided missile is cybernetic because it moves and it's moving towards a target, and as that target moves, it sends out information, it receives information back, and it readjusts itself to keep itself on target. So the idea of cybernetics is definitely something which implies a circuit. So definitely when we think of have a circuit, we think about electronics. It works on a circuit. It's not just cause or effect, but something plugs in and goes around. We can look at this in a bigger sense, think about our global village and our wired world. It's not just sending a simple information out, it is receiving things back in a way. Definitely video is very much a cybernetic, it can be a cybernetic medium. Unlike film, which just records something, we can do things in real time. And I show this little example of a great cybernetic video here. And this is an artist we're going to look at, Paul Ryan. And this is a piece from 1970 from a group he was in called Rain Dance. And they took their video cameras to the beach called Rays, and they were interested in sunlight and photographing each other on the beach. But when you see a little bit of this interference coming in here in some of these frames, ultimately what's happening is that there were electrical wires above the video cameras, and it caused interference here. So we have a whole looping of information electronically going around in the idea of cybernetics. Well, there's a very interesting man named Gregory Bateson who took this idea of cybernetics and was very interested in the idea of self-correcting circuits, and he thought a lot about the ecology about this. That even some people have even posited that the world is cybernetic, that is to a certain extent Earth is self-correcting, that what happens one place affects something in the other place, and hopefully that it can adjust and make adjustments for it. Maybe part of it's been posited that some of the issues of climate change and global warming is that the Earth as a cybernetic sort of entity has exceeded its abilities to make the adjustments in the environment for disturbances that we're putting into it. So it's an interesting idea that applies both to video and probably to really our ecological thinking. As we move ahead, last little term before we get into our artist, Paul Ryan, and look at some video, is this idea of decentralization. And when I asked how many people had made YouTube videos, certainly the idea of do-it-yourself, getting out there, is something that came out of this early video movement. And I'm showing a couple, our artist, Paul Ryan, that we'll see, with a very important essay called Cybernetic Guerrilla Warfare, that basically encouraged people to get out with their own video cameras and record the world. And I'm also showing something else in our collections, that this is just a letter from a group called Lanesville TV, which set up a little rogue television station upstate New York. And at the bottom of their letterhead it says the smallest television station in the U.S. There was the idea that we could go out, move ahead one slide, The Whole Earth catalog came out at this point, and it really encouraged people to use access tools for change on your own. The idea of do-it-yourself, tools for change. We don't need large corporations and other entities to tell us how to do things, that we can access these tools ourselves and make changes here. And as a final little part of this segment about the early part of video history, certainly video history did come out at a moment when ecological awareness was becoming germane in the United States. I show an image here from the first Earth Day gathering in 1970, and certainly a lot of the early video artists were interested in issues of ecology at this point. Certainly, some of them even made, the Rain Dance group made videos of the first Earth Day movement, which exists today. Well, if we go to our artist Paul Ryan, he had a kind of an interesting, pretty basic, simple idea that we have this new tool of video, and how about instead of recording people who are celebrating Earth Day, how about we take this tool, which is a cybernetic tool that's a circuit, has a lot of unique qualities, and we take it and we direct it at the environment itself. What kind of results can we see with the environment? Can it give us is it a new tool for understanding nature? Does it give us new abilities to understand nature? So seeing a little clip here of some of Paul's early work, just a little bit, and I want to sort of go back to where we were with our images of Albrecht Dürer and the landscape, and kind of ask you, how would we go about describing these things? Comes as video, we consider them to be pretty realistic renderings of the world with video. We trust what we see with video, but is a visual medium, does it allow us to share what we see with other people? How difficult is it for us to take a video camera out into the environment and make some studies? And I'd like to sort of, maybe as a little bit of an experiment, we could ask a question, how difficult would it be for you to describe what you see in this video to a person who's never seen it? Would that be a difficult task? Is describing the world, visual world, to people a difficult task if you don't have the actual examples in front of you?
So feel free to let us know if you were describing what you're seeing in this video to someone else, what would you type to them as the description? And while you do that, I know we've got several other videos to look at, so we're going to go ahead and you'll see, I think, with the subsequent ones as well, you can think about this question with those as well.
Good. We have several examples of Paul's work, but really sort of the underlying thread of Paul's thinking is how can we share, using this new technology, or new in the 1960s, how can we come to a way of talking about what we see visually by using, how can we share our perceptions, basically, by using this new medium of video? If I were to show this video, if I were to see this video, and you were to see this video, how could we relate to nature together? How can we talk about this? Well, Paul had the idea that perhaps one way we could think about this is that when we think about music, we have a musical score. We use video the Earth, and maybe come up with a score for Earth. Could we look at some of the underlying structures and some of the patterns? If we became trained at using video cameras and focusing them on the environment, could we actually gain a consensus about what we're seeing? Could we monitor the environment over time? Could we see changes over time? If we went back to this being very visually savvy, could we use video as a tool, like scientific tools we have for measurement? Could we use our perception as a way of monitoring the environment and learning about it, the environment, and definitely tracking ecological and climate change, perhaps even here? I'm going to jump ahead a couple slides because I know we're a little bit pressed for time, but I just want to say that this is the idea of Earth score that Paul came up with, which is very much like a musical score for looking at the visual world, and we can think again of that analogy with music there. Well, Paul certainly, one of Paul's ideas that he tried to promote, and he was quite successful in thinking about it, was that if we could share this kind of visual information in the world with video cameras, perhaps we could monitor the environment as a group. and had the idea for what he called an eco channel. Here we see an image of Paul outside New York City, and he was quite active with some community groups in New York to try to get established what he called an eco channel that would use part of the public access television stations, the municipal television stations in New York. I'll show a few documents which are in the Archives of American Art Collections. This is a petition that went out to people to get them to sign up to really establish an eco channel in New York City. And we have actual signatures on some of these great documents which are now at the archives. And finally, this idea was so kind of instrumental and well received. I'll throw in here a little bit of correspondence that Paul received from Al Gore about the idea. And you see the New York Times clipping where Gore proposes a video channel to show Earth all the time. So the idea of not just looking at the environment, but the secondary idea of sharing our perceptions about finding a way to talk about the environment together, not necessarily just in terms of numbers and data and things that we receive through newscasts, but actually by looking and using our eyes for video here. So let me just kind of finish up with the idea, certainly talking about our interactive environment that we're in. Certainly Paul's ideas and thinking and the early video thinking is really a precursor to this idea of webcams. And I did have a fun of going around to some of these websites and trying to find some webcams that are just really focused on nature. Here we see one with Niagara Falls and another one from up in Alaska. And so I think at the end of the day, we're kind of interested in whether some of these ideas of monitoring the world very visually and perceptually can make an impact on climate change. It allows us to really come together within our local communities to monitor our local environments and perhaps even think globally about things that the wired electronic village. So you might want to end up with just kind of thinking about how webcams might be used to better communicate about the environment.
And people are already sharing some thoughts, including Stacy, who says that they can be used to monitor change in animal behavior, particularly when there are any humans around, to get the unbiased view of how they're behaving without our presence. Jose shares a worry: with a webcam we capture local but not regional ecology. Ecology is a global issue. We have some people citing the possible privacy issues that come with this as well. So a lot of interesting thinking going on.
Definitely. Well, let me kind of leave you with one last thought of just saying that kind of seeing where we started here with our caves of Lascaux and sort of our early ideas of visual imagery. Let's not forget that in our modern day when we're given a lot of information from a lot of different sources. Let's not forget to go out and look at our environment with our own eyes and perhaps think perceptually about our natural world. Like Doug Herman mentioned, we're not out here to diss any scientists, but we're given a lot of numbers, we're given a lot of graphs, and a lot of charts which we're asked to believe. Perhaps one of the best ways that we can really think about the environmental issues is to get out there and see it with our own eyes and maybe think a little bit perceptually about
Thank you very much, Charles. A really fascinating look at communication media, at video, at art through a different lens, and also just you taught us some really great visual thinking techniques in the process that you modeled as well. So we'll go ahead and actually, while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and put up another one of Paul Ryan's videos. They're rather hypnotic, aren't they?
Well, it's certainly using some of the unique characteristics of video, playing in reverse and inversions and slow motions and things like that to really get us to see things, see the natural world a little differently. So
we'll let that one play here. I do want to remind people that in the teacher section of the SmithsonianConference.org/climate website, through which all of you entered our conference sessions today, there is a suggestion that whether you're here as part of a class or here as an individual, that you post images of positive environmental actions that are happening in your community on the SI Climate Flickr site. And if you tag it SI Climate and put it on flickr.com, we'll have a community-generated collection, which in a way ties in nicely with what you're talking about with webcams, albeit in this case doing it with still photos. We could certainly do the same on YouTube with SI Climate as a tag too.
Certainly, it's a great idea.
We're getting some nice thank yous to you and from people on behalf of students who are watching with them. So Charles and Sarah, who also participated and helped plan today's session, we appreciate your time. I want to encourage everyone has been hypnotized by the Charles Ryan video, so nobody's hearing between my monotonous voice and
well, that's a power of a good image, let me tell you. So.
That's right, and Paul Ryan's video. It's a good way to finish the day, though. So we invite you back for day 3, which starts at the same time as our prior 2 days started, and we have 4 great sessions, which, like today, I think will flip the climate change issue on its head in some really interesting ways to help us think about how to address it in a really interdisciplinary manner. So thanks for being here, and on behalf of Smithsonian Education and our sponsors, we will look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.